Hi, I'm Julie Hawks. Welcome to the Laws of Peace, where you will learn how to understand and apply God's laws in simple ways so that you can take small steps to create big changes and become the person you are always meant to be. The answers are in the scriptures. Let me show you how to find them. Today's episode is called The Secret to Receiving More Abundance. We are working on the law of giving and receiving, and there are three parts to this law. You can't give what you don't have, which we talked about last week. You can't keep what you don't give, and you can't sustain what you don't receive, which we'll talk about next week. Today, we're talking about how we can open ourselves up to receiving more. And a part of that is that we need to give. We need to give to get. But this is where it gets a little tricky. If your intention is, I'm going to do this for you, so you'll do this for me, then it becomes manipulation. In fact, Derek Rydall, in his book, The Abundance Project, where he teaches these concepts really well, he said, truly, if you are giving for any reason other than to just give unconditionally, then you're manipulating and creating a greater sense of lack and separation. A tree doesn't give of its fruit to get money or anything else. It gives because is what it was designed for. So as we go through today, I want you to think about what is your intention behind why you're giving. A lot of times we keep score, especially in a marriage. Well, I did the dishes 3 nights, so you need to do the dishes 3 nights. And I guess no one does it on the seventh night, right? But when we're keeping score, that's manipulating. Or when we're saying, well, I'm doing this for you, you owe me. Again, that disengages or blocks the law because we want to give because we're giving to give. Yeah, that made a lot of sense. But you see what I'm trying to say. Let's go to the scriptures and look at it there because that's a really great way to understand this at a deeper level. In 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 7 through 16, it's the story of the widow of Zarephath. And let me read a few of the verses. And it came to pass after a while, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. So there's this big drought. Elijah's hungry. And the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, Arise and go thee to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. The trouble is the woman doesn't have much either. Anyway, so he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the widow woman was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And she was going to fetch it, and he called her and he said, Bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thine hand. And she said, As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but a handful of meal in a barrel and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. Do you hear the hopelessness in what she's saying? She's been worried probably for a really long time about not having enough, about worrying. For us, it could look like not being able to pay a bill or not having enough to take care of something that's upcoming, and that scarcity, that lack that shows up in our lives is actually a normal part of life. And when we focus on that, we're stuck kind of in that natural man, and it's hard to have faith in that space. But we hear her hopelessness when she says, Look, this is going to be our last meal. We're out of food. We're going to die because we are so hungry. And so we have a lot of compassion for this woman. And then listen to what the prophet says. And kind of you want to think, well, aren't you kind of a little selfish, dude? But this is what he said. And Elijah said unto her, Fear not. I love how he starts out with, Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and thy son. So he is asking for this tremendous sacrifice of faith. He's saying, Don't feed your son first, feed me first. Do you think you have that kind of faith to give when you have nothing to give? Now, remember, we talked about giving in our last podcast about giving from a place of being filled with the love of God and not giving from burnout. Anyway, here we go. For thus saith the Lord God of Israel, this is in verse 14, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail until the day that the Lord sendeth rain upon the earth. Here's the promise. And he looks her straight in the eye and he promises, and he says, Look, if you feed me first, you will not run out of food. And I love her faith because that's exactly what she did. And she went and did accordingly to the saying of Elijah. And she did. And she and he and her house did eat many days. And the barrel of meal wasted not, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Elijah. This woman made a tremendous sacrifice, but mostly her sacrifice was faith. She believed that what the prophet was telling her was true. And so she took this leap of faith and she gave from her lack. And in giving from her lack, the Lord repaid her so more abundantly than she could have ever dreamed. And not only did he repay her with the food and the resources she needed to get through a really bad drought, but the rest of the story is that her son gets really sick and dies, and Elijah brings him back to life. Let's not underestimate what the Lord will do for us when we give in ways that he's inviting us to give. Let's go to another story. Mark chapter 8. This is verses 5 through 9 and 14 through 21. So everyone's aware of this, the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And a lot of you are aware that there's a second story, the feeding of the 4,000. And this is the story of the feeding of the 4,000 because the actual feeding is interesting as what happens afterwards. So let's go and look. So in verse 5, they have collected, everybody's hungry and the disciples want to send everybody home so they can eat at home, but the Savior wants to feed them. And so they gather up all the loaves and he asks, how many loaves have you? And they say 7. So this time they have 7 loaves to feed the people. And he commanded the people to sit on the ground and he took the 7 loaves and he gave thanks. Gratitude is such an important part of receiving. And break and gave it to the disciples, and they did set it before the people. And they had a few small fishes, and he blessed and commanded and set them, and they ate, and they were filled. And they took of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets. So not only did they have enough to feed this giant group of people, but they had leftovers. This is important to remember that there was leftovers. And they that had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. Now, the big day is over, church is over, all the people have gone home, and the disciples are going back to get on the boat. Only they forgot to bring the leftover bread and fishes. They're hungry. And so they get on the boat and they start fighting. This is so interesting. Now, the disciples had forgotten to take bread, neither had they in the ship with them more than 1 loaf. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And they reasoned among themselves, this is them fighting, saying, it is because we have no bread. So they start fighting because they're hungry. And Jesus comes along and he says, when Jesus knew it, he said unto them, why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not, neither ye understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? He's asking them some really important questions because he just fed the 4,000. And there was leftover bread. And he just fed the 5,000 and there was leftover bread and fishes. So in both instances, leftover bread and fishes. And so when we look at this, what is the Lord trying to teach these people that they are not grasping? He continues, he says in verse 18, having eyes see ye not, and having ears hear ye not, and do ye not remember? So many times the Lord provides miracles in our lives. He gives us the resources we need, especially when we're struggling financially. And we look at that and we go, but look what's all around me. We look at the evidence that's around us that we don't have enough, or it's not going to work out, or things aren't happening the way they're supposed to be happening. And we start having our little freak out. And that's why Elijah, the prophet, said to the widow, he said, fear not. And this is why Jesus is saying, remember, don't you remember the miracles? Are your eyes closed and your ears shut? And then he reminds them. And then when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said 7. And he said unto them, then how is it that ye do not understand? And he also asked them in verse 19, when I break the 5 loaves among the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said 12. And then when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said 7. And he said unto them, how is it that ye do not understand? What is the Lord trying to teach us in this story about ourselves, about our own lives? That when we give a little, he gives so much more back. There's always leftovers. But it's a leap of faith. For those of you who've tried to pay your tithing on a limited budget, you know it's a leap of faith. Or when you're invited to follow through on a church calling and it doesn't feel like you have the ability or the resources or the time or any of that, but you choose to do it anyway, that is a leap of faith. To give to the Lord always gives back more than you could ever dream of. So the question I have for you today is, are you recognizing the miracles in your life? And do you understand this principle that when you give, the Lord gives to you way more than you could ever dream of? In Luke chapter 6, verse 38, it says, give and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down and shaken together and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. Do you hear the law? that when you give, you receive. Only the way the Lord works is he gives way more than we could ever dream of. I had one of my dear friends 25 years ago, we were both had families of these small children, and we babysat, both of us, so that we could earn money to help sustain the family. And so all day long, she took care of small children, babies and small children, her own plus extras. And then the bishop of the ward called her in and invited her and her husband to be the nursery leaders, which is the leaders over the babies, the 18-month-olds to the 3-year-olds. And so they were called every Sunday, instead of going to their classes, they were invited to come and take care of the babies. And she was so distraught about this because she was taking care of babies all day, every day. And now it seemed like she got to do that on Sunday and there was no break. But this is what the Lord was asking of her. And she had the faith and she said yes. She said yes anyway. And what turned out to, it ended up being a really, really profound experience for her, because while she was in nursery, she made really, really close friends. She made friends with 2 women that were lifelong friends for her, that they were able to give her the love and support she needed on a regular, everyday basis. They were a reprieve from some of the challenges and the stress that she faced as they got together during the week, and they hung out and they were there for each other. And the Lord knew that she needed friends. And so he invited her to give a little bit more than maybe she thought she had to give. And the reward was so beautiful. You know, when the Lord asks us to give, we don't always know what we're going to receive in return. But when we do as the Lord asks, the blessings are just immense, immense, immense. I want to conclude with a verse from the scriptures. Now, remember, to build on the podcast we talked about last week, charity is to be filled with God's love and to give from that place. It's not giving because of fear or obligation or guilt. It's not giving because we're afraid to say no. It's not giving because of burnout. It's not giving from an empty cup. It's giving from that place of being filled by the Lord, and that he will give us the resources and the talents and the gifts and the everything that we need so that we can give as he is inviting us to. And in Ephesians chapter 3, verses 16 through 20, one of my very, very favorite sets of verses, it says this, that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened by might, with might by his spirit in the inner man. So basically he's saying, let me fill you up. Let me strengthen you, that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye being rooted and grounded in love. Do you see how this really goes with being filled with God's love? That you may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the depth and the height, and to know the love of Christ, which passeth knowledge, that ye might be filled with all the fullness of God. God wants to fill us up with his love, with his peace, with his help, so that we can do those things that feel really hard for us. And when we give, we receive. And when we give from a place of having, not from a place of manipulation, we open ourselves up to massive financial blessings, to closer emotional relationships, and to a better relationship with God filled with peace. Now here's the best, the very, very best. Verse 20. Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. That means that the Lord will give to us more than we can even dream of. That's what he wants to do for us, because he is our Father and because he is a giving God. We can read so much about that in the scriptures. So I'm asking you today to ponder, what is the Lord inviting you to give, and how can you give more generously from that place of having? Thank you so much for being here. It is so exciting to talk about how the Lord loves us and how he takes care of us, and how, as we live these laws at a deeper level, we receive so much. I've seen this happen in my own life, and I know you will see it in yours. If you have enjoyed this podcast, you will love our monthly membership, where we dive in at a deeper level. We have workshops, we have energy work, we have all of these things to support you at a deeper level as you're living these laws and creating all of this abundance in your life. And this week, our workshop is all about what to do. It's a relationship workshop. What do you do when it feels like the person you're in the relationship with isn't giving you what you need? How do you handle that? So join us for that. You can find out more information about that in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for being here.